In a dramatic turn of events that few saw coming, Washington's attempt to cripple China's aviation ambitions may have just handed Europe its biggest commercial victory in decades. Just weeks ago, the United States government made a calculated move, suspending the export of critical engine technology to China's homegrown aircraft manufacturer, COMAC. The target was clear: ground the C919, China's answer to Boeing and Airbus in the commercial aviation race. The weapon of choice? Cutting off access to the LEAP-1C engine, the beating heart of China's domestic airliner. American officials believed this would deliver a knockout blow, forcing China to abandon its aviation dreams and crawl back to Boeing. But here's where the story takes an unexpected twist. Instead of collapsing under pressure, China did something Washington hadn't anticipated. They activated Plan B, the CJ-1000A, a domestically developed engine that had been quietly progressing in China's research facilities. And then, in what can only be described as a masterclass in geopolitical chess, China began preparing what international aviation analysts are calling the deal of the decade. A staggering order for 300 aircraft from Airbus, Boeing's European rival, worth over $50 billion. If you're interested in understanding how global economics and politics intersect in ways that reshape entire industries, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most consequential commercial aviation stories of our time. A story about miscalculation, technological ambition, and how sanctions intended to weaken an opponent can sometimes destroy your own position in the world's most lucrative markets. Let's begin by understanding just how massive this shift really is, and why Boeing, the American aviation titan that once dominated China, now faces the very real possibility of being completely shut out of the world's second-largest economy. The glory days, when Boeing ruled China's skies. To appreciate the magnitude of what's happening now, we need to rewind the clock about 20 years. During the early 2000s and through much of the 2010s, Boeing wasn't just a player in China's aviation market, it was the undisputed king. Picture this. At the peak of their dominance, roughly 1 out of every 4 Boeing aircraft exported worldwide ended up in China. That's 25% of their total global export volume coming from a single country. Chinese airlines couldn't get enough of Boeing's 737s and 787 Dreamliners. The relationship seemed unshakable, built on decades of trust, training programs, and technical support. American executives would regularly fly to Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, signing billion-dollar contracts with China's state-owned carriers. The numbers tell the story of this golden era. In 2018 alone, Boeing delivered 206 aircraft to Chinese customers. That's more than 4 brand-new planes arriving in China every single week. The partnership appeared to be one of those rare win-win situations in international commerce. China got the modern fleet it desperately needed to connect its booming cities, and Boeing secured a cash cow that funded innovation and kept American factories humming. But empires, whether political or commercial, rarely fall all at once. They crumble gradually, then suddenly. And for Boeing in China, the cracks started appearing in the most tragic way possible. The 737 MAX catastrophe, when trust shattered at 30,000 feet. October 2018. A Lion Air flight in Indonesia falls from the sky shortly after takeoff, killing everyone aboard. Then, in March 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashes just minutes into its journey, claiming another 157 lives. Both aircraft were Boeing 737 MAX jets, the company's newest and supposedly most advanced single-aisle airliner. Investigators would later discover a fatal flaw in the plane's automated flight control system, a feature called MCAS that pilots hadn't been adequately trained to override. The global response was swift and devastating. Aviation authorities around the world immediately ordered the grounding of every 737 MAX in service. And here's a detail that Boeing executives likely still remember, with a bitter taste. China's Civil Aviation Administration became the very first major regulator on the planet to ground the MAX fleet. Not the FAA in the United States, not European authorities. China led the way, sending an unmistakable message that passenger safety would not be compromised, regardless of diplomatic or commercial considerations. The grounding lasted nearly 2 years in China, far longer than in most Western countries. Even when the MAX was eventually cleared to return to Chinese skies in 2023, airlines proceeded with extreme caution. The damage to Boeing's reputation was profound and, as it turns out, permanent in many ways. Look at the numbers, and you'll see the collapse in stark detail. Remember those 206 aircraft Boeing delivered to China in 2018? By 2022, that number had crashed, and I use that word deliberately, to just 12 planes. 12. That's a 94% drop in just 4 years. To put it in perspective, Boeing went from delivering roughly 4 aircraft to China every week to barely managing 1 per month. For a company that had built entire production lines based on Chinese demand, this wasn't just a setback. It was an existential crisis in one of the world's most important aviation markets. The delivery crisis, when production lines couldn't keep up. But the 737 MAX disasters, devastating as they were, represented only part of Boeing's China problem. Even customers who still trusted the brand faced another frustrating reality. Boeing simply couldn't deliver planes on time anymore. Throughout 2020, 2021, and 2022, Boeing struggled with what industry insiders call a delivery crisis. Supply chains snarled, critical components went missing, production lines slowed to a crawl, quality control issues triggered investigations by the Federal Aviation Administration, leading to even more delays. Airlines that had placed orders years in advance found themselves waiting indefinitely. Some watched their projected delivery dates slip by months, then years. For carriers trying to expand routes or replace aging fleets, these delays weren't just inconvenient, they were financially catastrophic. Empty slots in an airline's schedule mean lost revenue, disappointed passengers, and competitive disadvantages. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Boeing's chief rival was watching all of this unfold with barely contained excitement. Airbus, the European consortium formed by France, Germany, Spain, and the United Kingdom, had always played second fiddle to Boeing in the Chinese market. But around 2019 and 2020, they recognized something their American competitors apparently didn't: opportunity knocks loudest during your rival's darkest hour. Airbus had already made a smart strategic move back in 2008 by establishing a final assembly line in Tianjin, a major port city near Beijing. This wasn't just a factory, it was a statement of commitment to the Chinese market. It was the first time Airbus had set up a complete aircraft assembly facility outside of Europe. Chinese officials took notice. Unlike Boeing, which manufactured everything in the United States and then exported finished aircraft, Airbus was willing to bring jobs, technology transfer, and industrial capability directly to China. Fast forward to recent years, and that Tianjin facility has become Airbus's secret weapon. The factory operates with remarkable efficiency and has already delivered over 700 aircraft since beginning operations. While Boeing struggled with quality issues and regulatory scrutiny back in Seattle and South Carolina, Airbus's Chinese production line hummed along smoothly, turning out A320 family aircraft at a steady pace. The numbers reveal just how dramatically the competitive landscape has shifted. In 2022, while Boeing managed to deliver only 12 aircraft to Chinese customers, Airbus delivered 112 planes. The following year, 2023, Airbus delivered 97 aircraft to China, representing nearly 15% of their entire global output. Think about that for a moment. One country accounted for roughly 1/7 of Airbus's worldwide deliveries. Then came the deal that made headlines around the world. In 2022, China's 3 largest state-owned airlines, Air China, China Eastern, and China Southern jointly announced an order for 292 Airbus A320 aircraft. The total value? 37 billion US dollars. It was, at that moment, the single largest aircraft purchase contract signed anywhere in the world in recent memory. Boeing executives must have felt the ground shifting beneath their feet. Their worst nightmare was materializing total replacement in their once unshakable Chinese stronghold. While Boeing and Airbus battled for market share, Chinese engineers were working on something that would change the entire equation, a completely homegrown commercial airliner. The C919, developed by the state-owned Commercial Aircraft Corporation of China, known as COMAC, represents Beijing's most ambitious attempt yet to break the Western duopoly in commercial aviation. For decades, building a modern, competitive passenger jet seemed like an insurmountable challenge for Chinese aerospace manufacturers. These aircraft require not just advanced aerodynamics and materials science, but also incredibly sophisticated engines, avionics, and systems integration. The barriers to entry are enormous, which is exactly why only Boeing and Airbus have dominated the market for so long. But China approached the problem with characteristic patience and massive state investment. The C919 made its first commercial flight in 2022, and by 2023, the aircraft had entered regular service with Chinese airlines. Early performance data has been genuinely impressive. The plane now averages more than 8 hours of flight time daily, and its reliability rate has stabilized above 97%, metrics that rival established aircraft in the same category. Current production capacity remains relatively modest. COMAC can manufacture between 30 and 50 C919 aircraft per year at present. But here's where China's industrial planning comes into focus. Government projections indicate that production will ramp up to 150 aircraft annually by 2027, with the potential to exceed 200 units soon after. When you're the government, the primary customer, and the manufacturer all rolled into one, scaling up production becomes primarily a matter of political will and resource allocation. For China, the C919 represents far more than just another airplane. It's a symbol of technological sovereignty, a demonstration that China can compete in the most challenging sectors of advanced manufacturing. It also provides Chinese airlines with a third option beyond Boeing and Airbus, a strategic advantage that reduces dependence on foreign suppliers. But naturally, this kind of breakthrough didn't sit well in Washington. In the perpetual chess match between Washington and Beijing over technological supremacy, few moves are as blunt as export controls. And in 2020, the United States government decided to deploy this weapon against China's aviation ambitions. The target? The LEAP-1C engine, the critical power plant that makes the C919 fly. Here's the technical background. The LEAP-1C is manufactured by CFM International, a joint venture between America's General Electric and France's Safran. It's one of the most advanced and fuel-efficient engines designed for single-aisle passenger aircraft. The problem for China is that the most critical core technologies, the high-pressure compressor sections, turbine blade metallurgy, and engine control systems, remain firmly under American control. U.S. officials invoked their favorite justification, national security. They argued that allowing China access to such advanced engine technology posed risks of military conversion, the possibility that civilian engines could somehow be adapted or reverse-engineered for military applications. Never mind that the LEAP-1C is exclusively designed for commercial aviation and has no obvious military application. Never mind that similar engines have been exported to dozens of countries worldwide without incident. When Washington wants to halt technology transfer to Beijing, national security concerns provide the perfect legal framework. In late 2023 and early 2024, the restrictions tightened further. The United States began blocking not just complete engine exports, but also the transfer of core technical data and components necessary for engine maintenance and future development. The message was clear. If China wanted to build a competitive commercial aircraft industry, they would have to do it without America's most advanced propulsion technology. U.S. policymakers likely imagined this would either force China to abandon the C919 program entirely, or, at minimum, delay it by many years, while they scrambled to develop engine technology from scratch. What they apparently failed to consider was that China had already been preparing for exactly this scenario. The backup plan, China's CJ-1000A engine, emerges. Beijing's leadership learned a crucial lesson from previous technology sanctions: always have a plan B. Actually, have a plan B, C, and D. While COMAC was initially relying on CFM's LEAP-1C engines for the C919, Chinese aerospace engineers at the AECC Commercial Aircraft Engine Company had been quietly developing a domestic alternative called the CJ-1000A. Development of the CJ-1000A began more than a decade ago, but it accelerated dramatically as U.S.-China tensions intensified. The engine is designed to match or even exceed the performance specifications of the LEAP-1C, with comparable thrust, fuel efficiency, and reliability metrics. Obviously, creating a modern turbofan engine from scratch is extraordinarily difficult. It requires mastery of advanced materials, precision manufacturing, and complex thermal dynamics. But China has demonstrated a willingness to invest whatever time and resources are necessary to achieve technological independence in strategic sectors. Recent reports suggest that the CJ-1000A has completed extensive ground testing and is moving toward flight certification. While it may not yet match the LEAP-1C in every performance parameter, it's close enough to serve as a viable alternative. And here's the kicker. Once China achieves full domestic engine production, the C919 becomes completely immune to foreign export controls. Washington's leverage evaporates entirely. So the American sanctions, intended to cripple China's commercial aviation program, may have actually accelerated China's timeline toward complete technological self-sufficiency. It's a pattern we've seen repeatedly in semiconductors, telecommunications equipment, and now aerospace. Pressure from Washington often produces the opposite of the intended effect, spurring Chinese innovation rather than suppressing it. But the most delicious irony in this entire saga isn't just that China found a workaround. It's that the main victim of America's export controls might end up being an American company, Boeing. The $50 billion counterpunch. China's Airbus megadeal. According to information leaked to international aviation industry publications, COMAC is preparing to submit a procurement proposal that will fundamentally reshape the global commercial aviation landscape. The details are staggering. 300 aircraft from Airbus, including both the popular A320neo single-aisle jets and the larger A330neo wide-body aircraft. Total estimated value? More than $50 billion US. To put that figure in perspective, it would represent the single largest aircraft purchase order in Chinese aviation history, surpassing even that massive 292 plane deal from 2022. It would also represent one of the largest commercial aircraft orders ever placed worldwide by any customer. Timing-wise, sources indicate that the formal proposal could be submitted to Airbus as early as July of this year, with negotiations potentially concluding within months. Both sides have strong incentives to move quickly. For China, locking in aircraft deliveries now helps ensure fleet expansion plans stay on track. For Airbus, securing an order of this magnitude provides production visibility for years to come and further cements their position as the dominant foreign supplier in the Chinese market. The strategic implications are profound. If this deal goes through, and most industry analysts believe it will, Airbus will consolidate what amounts to a near-monopoly position among foreign aircraft manufacturers in China. Their market share, already commanding, would become virtually insurmountable. The Tianjin assembly line, combined with aircraft delivered from European factories, would supply the vast majority of China's imported commercial aircraft for the next decade. And Boeing? They would be left with scraps, if that. The prospect of recovering their former glory in China would shift from difficult to essentially impossible. Some analysts suggest Boeing might face complete exclusion from the Chinese market within the next 5 to 10 years, an outcome that would have seemed unthinkable just a decade ago. Is this retaliation or just business reality? So here's the natural question. Is China's massive Airbus order a calculated act of retaliation against American sanctions on the C919? Or is it simply the logical business decision based on Boeing's failures and Airbus's advantages? The honest answer is probably both. International commerce at this scale is never purely about spreadsheets and delivery schedules. It's always political, always strategic, always layered with multiple objectives. China's leaders don't make $50 billion decisions casually or without considering how they'll be perceived in Washington, Brussels, and capitals around the world. On one level, yes, this is absolutely a message to the United States. If you're going to weaponize technology exports and try to strangle our aviation industry, we'll simply take our business elsewhere. It's a demonstration that China has options, that American companies can't maintain market access while their government simultaneously pursues hostile policies toward Chinese industrial development. But on another level, this decision also reflects cold, hard commercial logic. Let's review the facts. Boeing has suffered massive reputational damage in China due to the 737 MAX crashes. Boeing has demonstrated chronic inability to deliver aircraft on schedule. Boeing faces ongoing production quality issues and regulatory scrutiny. Boeing's American parent company operates in a political environment openly hostile to Chinese economic interests. Meanwhile, Airbus has established local manufacturing, demonstrated consistent delivery performance, and comes from European nations that have maintained more stable economic relationships with China. From a purely rational business perspective, which supplier would you choose? The answer isn't complicated. The bigger picture: trade wars and tit-for-tat tariffs. To fully understand why Boeing finds itself in this predicament, we need to zoom out and look at the broader deterioration of U.S.-China economic relations over the past 6 years. The aircraft sanctions and Chinese aircraft orders don't exist in isolation. They're just the latest moves in an escalating economic confrontation that's been building since 2018. That year, the Trump administration initiated what became the largest trade war in modern history, imposing tariffs on Chinese goods that eventually reached over $550 billion in value. China responded with counter tariffs on American products worth more than $110 billion. These weren't symbolic gestures. They were massive barriers that fundamentally disrupted supply chains, raised costs for consumers and businesses on both sides, and injected enormous uncertainty into the trading relationship. Beyond tariffs, the United States has aggressively wielded technology export controls. Chinese telecommunications giants like Huawei and ZTE found themselves on the entity list, cut off from American semiconductors, design software, and manufacturing equipment. In 2022, Washington pushed through the CHIPS and Science Act, which not only subsidized domestic semiconductor production, but also included provisions prohibiting companies that receive U.S. funding from expanding advanced chip production in China. The United States also pressured allies in the Netherlands and Japan to restrict exports of lithography equipment and other critical semiconductor manufacturing tools to China. The message from Washington has been consistent and unambiguous. China will not be allowed to achieve parity with the United States in strategic technology sectors. Period. China, for its part, has responded with a combination of nationalist rhetoric, domestic technology development initiatives, and strategic reorientation towards suppliers in Europe and other regions less aligned with American foreign policy objectives. The aircraft decision fits perfectly into this pattern: reduce dependence on American technology, strengthen relationships with European partners, and accelerate domestic alternatives wherever possible. For Boeing, being an American company has transformed from an advantage into a liability when doing business in China. No matter how good their aircraft might be technically, they're now viewed through the lens of US-China strategic competition. And in that context, Chinese decision-makers have little incentive to hand billions of dollars to a company whose profits ultimately support an economy actively working to constrain China's rise. Airbus's strategic bet, building deep roots in Chinese soil. While Boeing hesitated and relied on its historical market position, Airbus made a fundamentally different choice. They decided to become a genuinely local player in the Chinese aviation ecosystem. That Tianjin final assembly line we mentioned earlier? It wasn't just a manufacturing facility, it was a long-term strategic investment in relationship building. Since 2008, the Tianjin plant has delivered more than 700 aircraft. But the significance goes beyond just production numbers. By establishing this facility, Airbus created thousands of direct jobs for Chinese workers and engineers. They developed local supply chains for components and materials. They built training programs and technical partnerships with Chinese universities and research institutes. They demonstrated commitment to China's industrial development in ways that Boeing, manufacturing everything back in America, simply didn't match. And Airbus isn't resting on its laurels. In 2023, the company announced plans to construct a second final assembly line in Tianjin, scheduled for completion by the end of 2025. This expansion will effectively double Airbus's local production capacity, enabling delivery of over 100 aircraft per year directly from Chinese facilities. By 2026, more than 20% of Airbus's global monthly production of single-aisle aircraft, currently running at about 75 planes per month, will come from Tianjin.